You're deep into an RPG, exploring dungeons, chasing quests, and collecting treasures along the way. At first, you pick up everything you see: a new sword, a rare potion, a curious trinket. But as the hours pass, frustration sets in. Your bag is overflowing, menus stretch endlessly, and finding what you need becomes its own battle. It's a moment every player knows too well, and it raises a bigger question. Why do RPGs so often struggle with inventory systems? Today, we'll explore how poor inventory management became a part of the genre's culture and what can be done to change it. Inventory systems in RPGs were never meant to frustrate us. In fact, most of the time, developers believed they were adding something meaningful, a touch of realism, a layer of strategy, or even a sense of abundance. The idea was that managing items would make the world feel richer, more alive, and more rewarding. But as players, we often discovered the opposite. What was designed as innovation slowly revealed itself as a burden, turning menus into obstacles instead of tools. We'll start with Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. The first issue I want to bring up is the weight limit system. Bethesda designed it so that it could increase the player's immersion by simulating the actual effects of carrying too much stuff. The weight of each item stacks until you physically struggle to even walk. Now, this is a pretty cool feature for those who want an additional challenge, but to the 90% of gamers who chose to hoard anything and everything that they can interact with, this was a death sentence. Pair this with the poorly designed menus, and you have one angry gamer that has to spend hours on organizing the loot from raiding a dungeon and then taking 2 hours to walk to the town downstream that would have taken 3 minutes to get to when you're not carrying the world's worth of stuff with you. And some items were quest locked, meaning you can't take them out of your inventory until the quest is finished. This meant that most gamers who leave quests half finished would have the least amount of space available to them when they need it the most. Finally, in order to craft anything in the game, you had to make sure you had the items on hand. Again, the function itself isn't too bad on its own, but then as a result the gamers would have to run to and from their storage spots just to get the materials required to craft a couple of potions, some weapons, and maybe even a shield. Now, some godsend gamers who decided to do something about this created some mods to help work around these issues. One mod was the crafting inventory extender, which basically merges all forms of storage you have into one central inventory. That way you didn't need to run errands every time you needed to get materials for crafting. Another mod was linked item distribution, which also sorted loot into designated containers via filters. This made it easier to find the things you needed when you needed them. This drastically improved inventory management and therefore made the game much more bearable. Next up, we have Dragon Age Inquisition. Unlike Skyrim that had a max weight as a limiting factor, here the limiting factor was that there was a cap on how many items you could carry. This could be upgraded to 100 slots max, but most players would still need to regularly clear out their character's inventory in order to make space for more items and gear. Speaking of character's inventory, each character has their own stash, meaning that you had to sort all of their stashes out individually, which would be a headache since while this game has some forms of categorizing, weapons, armor, accessories, valuables, there was no advanced filters to further sort stuff. And on the topic of stuff, there were so many different herbs, metals, and essences that you could pick up, most of which you could barely use since they were designed to make niche potions and gear, which resulted in it just being extra junk that would take up valuable real estate until you offloaded it to the vendors. Some gamers would sell everything in the valuables tab to make some extra space. Others ended up thinking twice about what they picked up, and others would just rotate party members so that they could stretch their storage cap as far as they could. People from the community made spreadsheets and guides to help others figure out what they should keep and what to sell, and others just embraced the storage cap as a challenge to keep the inventories clean and organized. In Fallout 4, the weight limit remained, but one new feature was added to increase utility, breaking down junk into crafting components. Bethesda did this to make it easier for players to craft a variety of stuff, but in turn it just amplified the problem. Now you don't just have junk in your inventory, you might also have crafting materials that you can't use or don't need right now, which made it even harder to progress the game since half the time spent playing is just you making trips back to base to drop off what you don't need. Just like Skyrim, the inventory did not have any sorting mechanics, which meant even more time had to be spent organizing your stuff so that you can find what you need when you need it. Quest items could not be dropped, so again those who don't finish quests would suffer the most. Workarounds were made, as some players created a network of storage chests and supply lines to make it easier to traverse the game without being over-encumbered. Mods saved the day for other players, with category sorting, weight reductions, and even infinite storage being used to make the game bearable. Some players embraced the system as a survival mechanic, carefully rationing what they carried. Others saw it as a constant interruption, breaking immersion and slowing the pace of exploration. Cyberpunk 2077 was a modern version of the hell in Fallout 4, just with no weight limit. Players could collect numerous weapons, clothing items, mods, and consumables. Each would be sorted by rarity and stats. But this sorting system was not enough, and in due time players would be spending long periods of time browsing their selection of items, trying to figure out what's useful and what's going to be dismantled. On the topic of dismantling, it was a mixture of blessing and curse. On the good side, it gave the lower tier items a chance to be useful by being used in creating better, higher tier items that the player will actually use. But it also encourages hoarding, and with the lack of a weight limit to remind you to clear up your inventory, players would eventually find themselves staring at a near endless selection of stuff that needs to be addressed in order to find that S tier rifle you just picked up. Many players avoided this by scrapping anything below a certain level. Others relied on the community of modders to save the day, which they did in the form of category sorting, auto-selling junk, and the quality of life fixes. And others would only collect the rare stuff to avoid clutter altogether. Looking back, it's clear that poor inventory systems weren't accidents. They were deliberate design choices shaped by philosophies that sounded innovative at the time. Skyrim's realism, Dragon Age's variety, Fallout's universal utility, and Cyberpunk's abundance all reflected developers trying to add depth and immersion, but the impact on players told a different story. Instead of enhancing the adventure, these systems slowed it down, forcing constant interruptions and pulling focus away from the world itself. The culture that emerged was one of acceptance. Players expected clutter, developers expected them to cope, and the genre quietly normalized the idea that managing menus was a part of the RPG experience. Each generation reinforced the flaws of the past, creating a cycle where inventory management was seen less as a design challenge and more as an unavoidable inconvenience. But not every RPG fell into this trap. The Witcher 3's inventory system felt like a breath of fresh air compared to the frustrations we've covered. Instead of dragging players down with arbitrary caps or endless clutter, it struck a balance that kept the focus on the journey. Items carried weight, but the limits were generous enough to encourage exploration without constant interruptions. Weapons, armor, alchemy ingredients, and quest items were neatly separated into tabs, making navigation far smoother than the cluttered menus of Skyrim or Cyberpunk. Alchemy and crafting were where the system truly shined. Once you brewed a potion or crafted bombs, they replenished automatically with mediation. This clever design eliminated the need to hoard consumables, turning inventory into a supportive tool rather than a source of anxiety. Menus were clean and readable, with sorting options that helped players quickly identify upgrades or junk. Even the vendor economy felt more thoughtful. Selling excess loot was straightforward, and merchants had enough gold to make transactions meaningful. Breath of the Wild's inventory system reflected Nintendo's philosophy of simplicity and freedom, but it also introduced clever mechanics that made management feel like a part of the adventure rather than a burden. Weapons, shields, bows, and armor were all neatly separated into categories, and while the infamous durability system meant items broke often, it encouraged experimentation instead of hoarding. Players cycled through gear naturally, discovering new weapons in the world rather than clinging to a single favorite. The crafting and cooking systems added another layer of charm. Ingredients were easy to collect and stack, and the act of combining them into meals and elixirs felt intuitive. Unlike the anxiety of Dragon Age's material overload, Breath of the Wild kept recipes simple, rewarding curiosity without overwhelming players with hundreds of niche items, making it easy to navigate even with the full pack. Storage limitations did exist. Weapon slots were capped until they expanded through Korok seeds, but this tied inventory growth directly to exploration. Instead of feeling like an arbitrary restriction, it became a reward loop. Find Koroks, expand slots, carry more gear. Vendors and shops were straightforward, and the economy was balanced, so selling excess loot felt purposeful rather than tedious. Monster Hunter World's inventory system stood out because it was designed to complement the game's core loop of hunting, gathering, and crafting rather than disrupt it. Items were weightless, meaning players never had to worry about being slowed down or capped, and everything stacked neatly, keeping clutter under control. The separation of categories, materials, consumables, ammo, and equipment made menus easy to navigate, even in the middle of hunts. Crafting integration was one of its strongest features. Gathering herbs, ores, and monster parts fed directly into weapon upgrades, armor sets, and consumables, and the auto-crafting system meant players could instantly replenish potions or traps without micromanagement. This streamlined system encouraged experimentation and kept the focus on preparation and combat strategy rather than menu management. Workarounds were really needed, but the players did lean on item loadouts, customizable presets that allowed quick swaps between gear and consumables before a hunt. This feature eliminated repetitive setup and gave inventory a sense of tactical flexibility. The storage box in Astera also provided virtually unlimited space, ensuring that materials from countless hunts never became a burden. Elden Ring's inventory system carried forward From Software's minimalist philosophy, but it did so with the clarity that kept management from overshadowing the adventure. Items were weight-based, yet the limits were generous enough that players rarely felt punished for exploring. Weapons, armor, talismans, and consumables were neatly separated into categories, and the menus, though simple, were intuitive enough to make navigation quick, even in the heat of battle. One of the strongest features was how inventory tied directly to build diversity. Talismans and consumables weren't just filler, they offered meaningful tactical options, encouraging experimentation without overwhelming players with clutter. Crafting also struck a balance. Materials stacked neatly, recipes were straightforward, and the system rewarded curiosity without drowning players in excess. Unlike Fallout 4's scavenger overload or Cyberpunk's endless dismantling, Elden Ring kept its crafting loop lean and purposeful. Players still found workarounds where needed, using storage chests to manage overflow or leaning on community guides to identify the most effective talismans, but the system rarely felt intrusive. Instead, inventory became a quiet support structure, enabling freedom of playstyles while keeping the focus on exploration and combat. These successes highlight a shift in philosophy. Instead of realism, variety, utility, or abundance, the focus became clarity, scarcity, efficiency, and accessibility. The impact was transformative. Players felt supported, empowered, and immersed, proving that inventory systems could enhance rather than hinder the adventure. From these successes, fresh solutions emerge. Smarter auto-sorting and filters could reduce clutter, letting players spend less time scrolling and more time immersed in quests. Expandable storage tied to progression could balance realism with convenience, rewarding exploration without punishing it. Context-sensitive menus could highlight what matters now, hiding irrelevant junk until it's needed, so players aren't distracted by noise. Dynamic crafting could streamline materials, ensuring players only see what's useful, turning resource management into a supportive tool rather than a constant interruption. Looking ahead, future design choices could reshape inventory entirely. Developers could add adaptive filters, search bars, and quick-use favorites, giving players direct control over how they interact with items. They could remodel crafting systems so materials don't overwhelm menus, turning complexity into clarity. And they could remove arbitrary weight limits that punish exploration, freeing players to enjoy discovery without constant interruptions. The impact here is freedom. Inventory becomes invisible when it needs to be, and empowering when it matters most. Poor inventory management in RPGs isn't just a minor annoyance. It's a design flaw born from well-intentioned but misguided philosophies. From Skyrim's realism to Cyberpunk's abundance, the innovations were clear, but the flaws were clearer. The impact on players was equally clear: slowed exploration, broken immersion, and frustration that lingered long after the quest ended. The good news is that some games have already shown us better paths. Titles like The Witcher 3, Breath of the Wild, Monster Hunter World, and Elden Ring prove that inventory can be designed as a tool that enhances the player's experience rather than hinder it. The impact was liberating: smoother gameplay, meaningful choices, and freedom to focus on the adventure itself. Fresh ideas can push the genre forward, ensuring that future RPGs don't suffer the same fate. The impact of these changes would be transformative. Players would no longer remember menus as obstacles, but as invisible systems that quietly support their journey. So the next time you're buried under loot, remember, it's not your fault, it's the system. And systems can change, shaping not just how we play, but how we experience the world we love. Now then, if you could change one thing about the item management system, what would it be and why? Thanks for watching, and as always, stay safe everyone. Bye for now.